In this lesson, we are going to do an introduction to parabolas. This is section 8.3 in your textbook on page 665. For this lesson, I decided to break it apart into 4 separate videos. There are a great deal of components to this one section, but they do flow together rather nicely. So the 4 videos are going to be what does A do, which is this first video. Then the second video is finding the vertex. Your third video is graphing quadratics. And that fourth video is going to be matching quadratics with equations. So in these first 3 videos right here, I'm going to actually have handouts that I'm using to complete that lesson. And then for this very last one, I am going to use the textbook. So if you do have your textbook, it would be favorable if you could have that with you during that last video. So I have drawn an example of some parabolas down here for you. A parabola is a U-shaped graph, and we get that U-shaped graph when we have a equation that has an x squared in it. That x squared is what gives us that U-shaped graph. So standard form for a quadratic equation is f of x equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay? So a, that coefficient in front of x squared, it tells us 2 things. The first thing it tells us is whether our graph is going to face up like this shape or if it's going to face down like this shape. Okay, so we know that it's going to face up if A is positive. We know it's going to face down if A is negative. Okay? Then, whether our graph is wide, narrow, or the same as the graph of f of x equals x squared. So that's where our little pitchfork looking drawing is going to come into play, okay? So if A is a fraction, actually let me come back down here. So if A is a fraction, we are going to have a wide graph, okay? So this right here is if it's a fraction. If A is a positive or a negative 1, it's going to be the same as f of x equals x squared. So this little red right here is the graph f of x equals x squared. Okay, so that's the normal size of a graph if you just have a 1 in front of that x squared. So it can be either positive or negative 1. Okay? Then, if A is a whole number other than positive or negative 1, then it's going to be narrow. So it's if a whole number other than positive or negative 1. Okay, so hopefully that color coding helped you. So your graph is normally looking just about like this size, and that's if your A value is a positive or a negative 1. Remember, positive or negative just says whether it's going to be up, and negative says down. Then, if it's a whole number other than positive or negative 1, so 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, and so on, then it's going to be a narrow or a skinny graph. And then, if it's a fraction, then it's going to be a wide graph. Okay? So one other thing that I wanted to point out is that your C value right here, which I am so sorry, your C value is your Y-intercept. Okay, so your Y-intercept is where your graph is going to cross over that y-axis. So this value right here, the value without any x, is going to move your graph up and down. Okay, so A tells us whether it's going to be up or down, and whatever number A is going to determine whether it's going to be very skinny or whether it's going to get wider and wider and wider. And then your y-intercept is what moves it up and down. Okay, so we are going to need to know about A and the y-intercept for this next handout we're going to look at. So I have this handout, What Does A Do? If you have access to my class online, then it would be located, this would be located in the test 4 folder. So if you would like to actually print this handout off and try it yourself first before I go over the answers, then that would probably be a good idea for practice for you. So the directions state for the given quadratic function, tell whether the graph opens up or down, and whether the graph is wider, narrower, or the same as the graph of f of x equals x squared. Okay, so you can do this a couple of different ways. I think it's easier to be in the mindset where you're going to do up and down first for all of the problems, and then you can say wide, narrow, or the same for them all. So what I want to do for this one is we're going to go with up and down first. Okay, so since A is a negative, we're going to say that it's going to go down. For number 2, A is a positive, so it's going to be facing up. 3 is a positive, so up. 4 is a positive, so it will be up. 5 is positive, so it would be up. 6 is positive, so it would be up. 7 is negative, so we would say that one is down. 8 is positive, so it would be up. 9 is positive, so it would be up. 10 would face up because it's a positive 1/4. 11 is a positive 1, so it would face up. 12 is a negative 4, so it would face down. 13 is a negative 1, so it would face down. 14 is a positive 1, so it would face up. 15 is a negative 9, so it would face down. 16 is a negative 8, so it would be down. 17 is a negative 1, so it would face down. 18 is a negative 1, so it would be down. 19 is a negative 2, so it would face down. And then 20 is a negative 5, so it would face down. Now we want to look and see if we're going to say that it's wide, narrow, or the same. Okay, so it was a 6, negative 6 for our A value. Okay, so since it's a whole number other than 1, then we're going to say it is narrow. Okay, so I'll project this very quickly just so you can see. So if we're looking at a fraction, we're going to say wide. If it's a positive or a negative 1, we're going to say same. And if it's a whole number other than 1, we're going to say narrow. So looking at number 2, it's a 1. So we're going to say it's the same as f of x equals x squared. Number 3 is a fraction, so that would be wide. 4 is a 1, so we would say same. 5 is a 1, so we would say same. 6 is a fraction, so we would say wide. 7 is a 1, so we would say same. 8 is a fraction, so we would say wide. 9 is a fraction, so we would say wide. 10 is a fraction, so we would say wide. 11 is a 1, so we would say the same. 12 is a -4, so since it's a whole number other than 1, we would say that it is narrow. 13, it's a -1, so we would say the same. 14 is a +1, so we would say the same. Remember, the difference between the negatives and the positives is just whether it's going to go up or down. That's the only difference there. Number 15, a -9. It's a whole number other than 1, so we would say narrow. 16, a -8, so it's narrow. 17 is a -1, so it would be the same. 18 is also a -1, so it is the same. 19 is a -2, so we would say narrow. 20 is a -5, so we would say narrow. So the only other thing that I want to do on this paper, which it doesn't state it in the instructions, but I do want to state the y-intercept for each of these problems, okay? And I'm just going to do it in a different color so it's going to be easier for us to see it. So your y-intercept, this is our standard form. So your y-intercept is the c value. So it is the value without an x, okay? It is the value without the x. So on number 1, notice there is no value that does not have an x. So we would say that our y-intercept is 0. For number 2, we have a value without an x, it's a 10. So our y-intercept is 10. And remember, y-intercept stands for where your graph crosses the y-axis. Number 3, your y-intercept is a -7. Make sure you realize it is a -7 and not a +7. Number 4, your y-intercept is a +2. Number 5, your y-intercept is a +19. Number 6, your y-intercept is a -7. Number 7, your y-intercept is a -3. Number 8, your y-intercept is a -8. Number 9, your y-intercept is a -2. Number 10, your y-intercept is a -9. Number 11, your y-intercept is a +13. Number 12, notice that you've got a -4x squared and a -10x, but we don't have a value that does not have an x, so that means that our y-intercept here is 0. And just for your visual purposes, when your y-intercept is 0, that means your graph is actually going to cross here. So for example, since this one is down and narrow, it's probably going to look something along those lines. That is absolutely not completely accurate, but this is narrower and it crosses at that 0 point. Okay. All right, so let's look at 13. -5 is our y-intercept. 14 is a positive 14. 15 is a 0. 16 is a positive 5. 17 is a negative 8. 18 is a negative 12. 19 does not have a term that doesn't have an x, so that means it is a 0. And then the same thing with 20. Since it doesn't have a term without an x, it is also a 0. So that concludes this lesson. So we just watched the video, What Does A Do? So the next video you're going to watch is titled Finding the Vertex. Alright, so that's the second video you should watch. Alright, I wish you the best of luck.